Have you ever experienced a single moment that makes you feel like your entire life has shifted? That's exactly what happened to me one evening at a party. I remember it vividly, the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of glasses, laughter spilling across the room, and the subtle glow of warm light reflecting off faces I barely noticed. But in the middle of all that, I didn't see anyone else. I only saw her. It was almost immediate. Our eyes met, and in that instant, I felt something I can't fully explain. A mix of curiosity, excitement, and a nervous tension that made my heart beat faster. She was 11 years older than me, married, yet her presence was magnetic. Her gaze carried warmth, but it was tinged with an unmistakable sadness, the kind that tells you someone has carried too many burdens alone. And in that gaze, I sensed a silent plea, to be understood, to be truly seen. We started talking. Her voice was soft, melodic, and playful, with just a hint of sarcasm that made every word feel alive. She spoke of her marriage, of promises broken, of the isolation she felt despite being surrounded by family and friends. She told me she was planning to leave her husband, that her life was no longer hers, and that somehow I seemed like the only person she could confide in. I listened, completely captivated, and for a moment I believed it was harmless, just a fleeting connection, a conversation that wouldn't lead anywhere. But her words were more than mere stories. Each sentence carried weight, each pause was deliberate, each laugh was layered with meaning. There was a loneliness hidden beneath her playful smile, a quiet desperation in the way she looked at me when she thought I wasn't noticing. I felt my heart quicken. Part of me wanted to step back, to retreat, but another part, an overwhelming part, was drawn toward her, compelled by something I didn't understand. We laughed together over trivial things, discussed our favorite movies, music, and books. We traded stories about our pasts, small personal details that shouldn't have meant much, but in that moment felt profoundly intimate. Then, almost imperceptibly, she leaned in slightly closer and asked, "Do you want to hear the truth?" It wasn't just a question. It was a challenge, a silent dare, an invitation into a hidden world. And without hesitation, I nodded. I had no idea that by saying yes, I was stepping into something far beyond a casual conversation. That moment marked the beginning of a secretive, dangerous, intoxicating path that would consume my thoughts and my heart in ways I couldn't imagine from that point. Our connection deepened quickly. Each story, each glance, each laugh drew me further into her orbit. I could feel the subtle tension in the air, the thin line between curiosity and temptation slowly eroding. I found myself hanging on every word, wanting to know more, to be closer. Even as my mind whispered warnings I chose to ignore. But what drew me most wasn't just her stories or the secrets. She revealed it was the way she made me feel. For the first time, I felt like I was truly seeing someone, like I mattered in her world in a way no one else did. And in her eyes, there was an unspoken question. Will you follow me further? I knew, even in that first hour, that nothing would ever be the same. That night, a door opened, a door into a story I couldn't yet see the end of. A story full of desire, risk, and consequences I hadn't begun to comprehend. Every laugh, every whispered word, every fleeting glance was a thread, weaving me into a web I couldn't see through yet. And as I left the party that night, walking under the cool glow of the streetlights, I felt it a subtle, unnerving certainty that this encounter would change my life. I couldn't see how, I couldn't see why, but I knew with absolute clarity that my life would never return to the way it had been before meeting her. And in the back of my mind, a question already began to take shape. Who's right? Who's wrong? And can I ever find my way out of this? Even now, thinking back, I can still feel the pull of that moment. That single glance, that single conversation, had the power to start a chain reaction that neither of us could have predicted. And in that instant, the first step was taken into a world where nothing would be simple, and everything would carry weight. After that first encounter, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Every little detail, the way she laughed, the way her eyes seemed to hold secrets, the subtle warmth in her voice kept replaying in my mind. I told myself it was just curiosity, that it would fade. But it didn't. It only grew stronger. We started texting. At first, it was casual small talk about movies, music, and mundane things. But quickly, it became something else. She would send messages late at night, telling me about her day, her frustrations, and the loneliness that seemed to follow her like a shadow. I found myself waiting for those messages, my heart racing every time my phone lit up with her name. Then came our first secret meeting. She suggested a quiet coffee shop downtown, a place where no one would recognize her. I remember walking in, my stomach tight with nervous anticipation. And there she was, sitting alone, a small smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. We talked for hours about everything and nothing, about dreams, regrets, and the strange, invisible threads that had brought us together. Every glance, every brush of hands, every subtle smile felt charged. I knew what I was doing wasn't right. She was married, and yet there was a magnetism I couldn't resist. And she knew it. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with that same quiet question in her eyes. Will you stay? As weeks went by, our meetings became more frequent. Late night walks, quiet dinners, stolen hours in the back corners of cafes. She would talk about her husband, not in a way that excused her, but in a way that drew me in, made me feel like I was part of her escape. I started to feel a complicated mix of excitement and guilt, longing and fear. The texting grew more intense. She'd send me her thoughts at odd hours, complaining about her life, about her marriage, about the emptiness she felt. Sometimes I felt like I was the only person keeping her sane, the only one who truly understood her. And that scared me even more. I wasn't ready for the emotional weight, but somehow I couldn't pull away. One evening, she called me crying. Her voice was trembling, broken, and I could hear the raw pain in every word. She wasn't blaming me yet, but the vulnerability was overwhelming. I held the phone to my chest, unsure of what to say, just listening. That night, I realized the relationship had already moved far beyond casual. It wasn't just meetings and laughs anymore. I was part of her life in a way I hadn't intended, and I couldn't just step back without consequences. And yet, despite the danger, the thrill was undeniable. Every moment together felt forbidden, exciting, addictive. I found myself rationalizing, telling myself it was okay because she was leaving her husband, because she needed someone to lean on. But deep down, I knew I was already caught in a web of desire, secrecy, and complicated emotion that I couldn't easily escape. One night, after a particularly long coffee and walk through the empty streets, she looked at me and whispered, "I don't know what I'd do without you." My chest tightened. That simple sentence carried so much weight, so much expectation, that I felt both honored and terrified. The truth was, I didn't know either. I wasn't ready to be her everything. and yet the idea of letting her go felt impossible. That's how it started, slowly, almost imperceptibly, until suddenly I was entwined in her world. Every secret meeting, every late-night call, every small smile or touch deepened the connection, but also raised the stakes. I was aware, somewhere in the back of my mind, that this was dangerous, that lines were being crossed, that the moment she stepped back into her married life, everything could collapse. And the truth was, I didn't want it to collapse, not yet. I wanted more. I wanted to understand her completely, to be part of her life in a way that went beyond the superficial. I wanted to be trusted, needed, desired. But I also knew this thrill came with a cost I hadn't fully considered, and that one day, that cost might come crashing down by the time our secret relationship had been going on for a few weeks. I was already addicted, not to the idea of cheating itself, but to her, to the way she made me feel alive, important, and needed. Every message, every meeting, every stolen moment became a thread pulling me further into a story I wasn't sure I could ever walk away from. And I had a sense, deep in the pit of my stomach, that this was only the beginning, that soon the consequences of our actions would rise to the surface in ways I wasn't prepared for. But for now, in the dim light of cafes, under the quiet hush of night, it felt intoxicating, inevitable, and impossible to resist. The following week, everything began to shift in ways I hadn't anticipated. What started as casual texting gradually became a constant stream of messages on my phone. She reached out at all hours, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late at night, sharing the weight of her marriage, her fears, and a loneliness that seemed to follow her everywhere. I found myself reading each message with a racing heart, torn between the urge to respond immediately and a growing fear that I was already too deeply involved. The pressure wasn't just emotional, it was moral. Every message felt like a quiet plea. Please don't leave me. I need you. I knew I couldn't ignore her, and part of me wanted to help, to be her support. But another part of me, smarter, more cautious, knew I wasn't ready to carry such a heavy responsibility, to become entangled in someone else's life in such a profound way. Our meetings became more frequent. No longer just casual coffee or walks, we began seeking out secret dinners, hidden corners in cafes, and empty streets late at night. Each place felt like a tiny world just for us. When she laughed, I noticed a brightness that wasn't visible in her daily life, but I could still see a lingering sadness in her eyes. Every moment together was a mix of sweetness and tension, pleasure and weight, excitement and guilt. I knew we were going too far, but the pull was irresistible. One night, she called me in tears. Her voice trembled, broken, raw with desperation. Don't leave me. I need you right now. My chest tightened, and I felt an almost physical ache at the sound of her pain. I wanted to hold her, to comfort her, but I also realized I was standing on dangerous ground. Each attempt to step back was met with another message, another late-night call, another subtle reminder of the role I had taken in her life, making me feel responsible for her, even though I hadn't asked for that. Responsibility, the moral conflict, gnawed at me constantly. I began asking myself, what am I doing? Am I becoming the reason a family could fall apart? Thoughts of her husband, her children, her life all weighed heavily on me. And yet, despite knowing all this, my heart undeniably wanted to be close to her. Our conversations deepened. She opened up about her past, her dreams, and her disappointments. She talked about her Lena, 10-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter, and her fear of losing them if she left her husband. I could feel the raw weight of her pain through her words, and it pressed upon me like a responsibility I wasn't ready to bear. Every secret meeting escalated in intensity. She wanted to see me more often, not just late at night or on weekends, but even in the afternoons when she claimed her husband was busy. I felt like I was being pulled into a storm I couldn't escape. The mixture of desire, thrill, and fear became addictive. A dangerous cocktail I couldn't resist. One evening, after a long walk and a quiet dinner, she leaned toward me and whispered, "I don't know what I'd do without you." My chest tightened once again. Those words carried an unbearable weight, a mixture of hope and expectation. I felt both honored and terrified. The truth was, I didn't know either. I wasn't ready to be her everything, yet the thought of letting her go seemed impossible. That's when it became clear. This was no longer a casual affair. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, I was fully entwined in her world. Each stolen moment, each late-night conversation, each subtle touch pulled me deeper into a story I couldn't see a way out of. I knew, deep down, that consequences were inevitable. When her life collided with her marriage, the repercussions would be explosive. Yet even knowing this, I couldn't stop. I wanted to understand her completely, to be trusted, to be needed, to be wanted. And though I knew there was a price to pay, each meeting and each message felt intoxicating, unavoidable, as if fate itself was dragging me further into her orbit. After only a few weeks, I realized that I was already addicted to her, not the affair, not the secrecy, but to her, to the way she made me feel alive, important, necessary. Every text, every call, every stolen glance pulled me further into a story I couldn't escape. Deep down, I had a foreboding sense. This was just the beginning. Her marriage, her children, her husband's eventual anger and heartbreak, it was all looming, waiting to erupt. And though I sensed the storm approaching, I didn't yet know how fierce it would be, or how much I would be dragged into it. And yet, in those stolen nights, under the dim lights of cafes and the quiet hush of empty streets, everything felt intoxicating, irresistible. I was caught in a dangerous balance of fear, guilt, desire, and adrenaline. I wanted to run, but I also wanted to fall headlong into it. And somehow I knew that one day the consequences would arrive suddenly, irrevocably, and nothing would ever be the same. Everything changed suddenly, violently, like a storm crashing into my life. One morning I received a call from her. Her voice trembled, on the verge of tears. Her husband had discovered our relationship. My chest tightened, my stomach dropped. I had known it was only a matter of time, but when it actually happened, the fear, guilt, and anxiety came crashing down on me all at once, heavier than anything I had ever felt. She called me, crying, her voice a mix of anguish and anger. "This is all your fault. If it weren't for you, he would never have known. And now everything is falling apart." I sat in silence, not knowing what to say. She was blaming me for the collapse of her family, for dragging her into a whirlwind of emotion I didn't know how to control. She told me her husband had filed for divorce that very morning. I felt trapped in a maze of guilt, fear, and anger. I hadn't forced her into anything. I hadn't demanded any of this. Yet her words cut deep, as if I were responsible for the entire collapse of her life. Through the phone, I could hear her rapid, uneven breathing, the raw fear in her voice. "You don't understand. I have nothing left. Number house, no money, no life. And the kids, they might not even stay with me. I was stunned. In that moment, I wasn't just her lover. I had become the focal point of a crisis I had no control over. In the days that followed, the calls and messages were relentless. She wanted me there, wanted me involved, demanded that I take responsibility for everything that was happening. I felt trapped, torn between wanting to help and wanting to run away from the overwhelming pressure. Every text, every call, felt like another weight pressing down on my mind, reminding me that I was at the center of a storm I couldn't escape. She spoke about her children, a 10-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter, and her fear that her husband would gain full custody. Every word she said added another layer of responsibility onto my shoulders. I began to ask myself, am I doing the right thing? Am I the reason this family is breaking apart? But I also knew I couldn't control any of it. Our relationship became more complicated than ever. The more she leaned on me, the more she texted and called, the heavier the pressure became. I loved her. I wanted to be with her. But I was scared. I felt guilty. I felt helpless. Every moment together was no longer just pleasure or excitement, had become an emotional battlefield, balancing love, guilt, responsibility, and fear. One night, we met at a quiet cafe. She grabbed my hand, her eyes red from crying, her voice trembling. You have to help me. If not, I'll lose everything. The kids, my life, everything. I squeezed her hand gently, but inside, I knew I couldn't do much. I was just one part of this storm, not the one in control. Yet that very helplessness made me feel more connected to her than ever. I wanted to protect her, to shield her, to do something to fix what had happened. But I had no idea where to start. I didn't know how to save the situation without dragging both of us into even deeper trouble in the following days. The pressure kept growing. Her texts and calls were unending, every word laden with a desperation I could almost feel physically. I felt like I was living inside a maze of emotion with no exit. I wanted to run, yet I couldn't leave her. And in the back of my mind, a question kept echoing. Can I handle all the consequences that I've caused? That mix of fear, guilt, desire, love, and pressure turned every moment of my life into an internal battle I didn't know if I could survive. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The following days felt like living inside a nightmare with no escape. She texted and called constantly, each word drenched in desperation and blame. I felt myself trapped in an emotional whirlwind I couldn't stop, couldn't escape. The more she leaned on me, the more she poured every ounce of pressure onto me. And I realized our relationship had spiraled completely out of control. One evening, she met me at a familiar cafe, her eyes red, her voice trembling. You don't understand. Without you, I have nothing left. The kids, the house, everything. It will all be gone. I looked at her and felt my chest sink. I wanted to tell her I would help, that I would be there, but deep down I knew I couldn't control any of it. No one could. We began arguing. She blamed me for dragging her into this mess, for causing her husband to find out, for the chaos that had now consumed her life. I tried to explain, tried to defend myself. I didn't force you. This happened because we both chose it. But my words felt almost meaningless. Her eyes still held anger and despair, and I could see that reasoning alone wasn't enough. The tension wasn't just between us. She told me about heated conversations with her husband, legal meetings over custody, and the fear that she might lose everything. Each story weighed heavily on my mind. I realized this relationship was no longer about excitement or pleasure, had become a battlefield of emotions, balancing love, guilt, responsibility, and fear. One day, she texted me, "You have to stay with me. Otherwise, I'll fall apart completely. The kids will lose their mother. Do you understand?" My chest tightened. I loved her, but I wasn't a superhero. I couldn't save her from all the consequences, and that helplessness made me feel paralyzed. My own life began to unravel. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work or studies. Every phone buzz made my heart jump, wondering whether it was another crisis, another demand for me to take responsibility. I felt myself being swept deeper into a storm I couldn't control. Our meetings became more tense than ever. We wanted to be close, but we also feared each other's anger and blame. Smiles became strained, touches laced with anxiety. I realized the joy we once had was gone, replaced by pressure and fear. One evening, she broke down in the middle of the cafe. "You have to understand, everything is falling apart. The kids, my life, everything. And it's all your fault." I held her hand, but inside I knew there was nothing I could do to change reality. I couldn't save her from the consequences, and I couldn't protect myself from being dragged further into this emotional storm. In that moment, I realized one thing: this relationship had crossed a line. It was no longer fun. It was no longer a game. It had become a force that could destroy both of us if we weren't careful. Every feeling, every choice, every action carried weight, and that truth terrified me. Yet paradoxically, that very danger made it impossible for me to leave her. I wanted to protect her, to help, to do something to prevent her from falling apart. But I also knew that every attempt might lead to unforeseen consequences, pulling both of us deeper into this emotional hurricane. And I knew the worst was yet to come. Legal consequences, her husband's anger, the threat of losing custody, and her own volatile emotions all were waiting to erupt. And when they did, I would be forced to confront a storm no one could save us from. The pressure over the past few weeks had reached a breaking point. Every day, every hour, felt like a mental endurance test. She leaned on me more than ever, her constant texts and calls reminding me that I had become the center of all the chaos. And finally, one day, everything exploded. She called me, her voice almost screaming, mixed with sobs. "You don't understand. You've destroyed everything. The kids, my husband, my life. It's all falling apart because of you." My chest felt like it might shatter. Her accusations pressed down on me as if the weight of the entire world was on my shoulders. I knew that any explanation now would be meaningless. We met that evening in an empty park. The air was so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat pounding. She stood before me, tears streaming down her face, eyes full of desperation and anger. "Do you understand? Without you, what will I have left? The kids will lose their mother, my life. I'll have nothing." I wanted to hold her, to tell her I was sorry, that I would do something to fix this. But the words stuck in my throat. I realized a painful truth. I could not solve this. I could not save her from the storm we had created. I was only a part of it, not the one controlling it. The tension between us reached its peak. We both loved and hated each other at the same time. Every word, every gesture carried weight. A simple touch could make my chest tighten, wanting closeness, but also feeling fear. I saw the pain and despair in her eyes and understood that she was pleading for help, but also placing all the responsibility on me. She told me about the legal battles, about her husband's determination to gain custody, and the children's struggle stories I could feel in my own chest. I loved her, but love alone was not enough. I could not fight the entire world that was collapsing around us. Then came a moment I'll never forget. She dropped to her knees in front of me, voice trembling, sobbing, "You have to help me. You have to save me from all this. Otherwise, I'll lose everything. The kids will lose their mother." I felt my world collapse inside me. I knew that if I continued, I would drag both of us even deeper. But if I walked away, she would completely fall apart. I stood there, silent, looking at her, feeling every ounce of her pain, despair, and the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. I realized one thing. I had to make a decision that would affect not only me, but also her, the children, and the future we were either building or destroying together. In that moment, I understood there was no easy choice. Every path was dangerous. Every decision carried a price. I had to accept the truth. Love and responsibility do not always go hand in hand, and I had to decide whether I could step away from this storm to protect myself and let her stand on her own, or continue to be pulled into it and face even harsher consequences. The dim streetlights cast shadows across her tear-streaked face, highlighting every line of tension, every trace of despair. I looked at her and then at myself, and something shifted inside me. I knew that from this moment, our lives would never be the same. A crucial decision had matured, one that would change the future. Not just for me, but for her and the children. And as I took a deep breath, preparing to speak the decision aloud, I knew this was the turning point. The moment when everything would be revealed. No turning back, no hiding. Only moving forward and facing all the consequences of what we had done. That evening, after all the anger, despair, and tears, she and I stood facing each other in a heavy silence. No messages, no calls, just the quiet weight of two people bearing far more than they should have to. I could feel every shallow breath she took, every subtle quiver in her hands, every tear tracing down her cheeks. It was in that stillness, that fragile pause, that I realized how every choice, every action we had taken over the past months had led us to this moment, a point where nothing could be undone, and yet everything could still change. She looked at me, her eyes bloodshot from crying, but there was a strange mix of strength and vulnerability, forgiveness and sorrow all at once. "You can leave if you want, but I need to find my own strength, for myself and for the kids. I can't lean on you forever, no matter how much I want to." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I understood then that love isn't always about staying together. Sometimes it's about letting someone go so they can discover their own courage, their own resilience. Sometimes love means stepping back. We spoke for hours that night. I listened as she poured out everything, her fears about facing her husband in court, the anxiety over custody battles, the weight of the children's well-being on her shoulders, and her own internal struggle to rebuild her life. Each word was laced with pain, yet with a faint glimmer of hope. She realized that while I had been a part of her life, I could not carry the weight of her world for her. And I realized that love alone wasn't enough. Sometimes love must be paired with boundaries, with respect for reality, and with the courage to let go. As the night deepened and the first rays of dawn began to peek over the horizon, she seemed stronger, if only slightly. I looked at her sleeping children, their innocent faces peaceful despite the chaos surrounding them, and I felt the gravity of her responsibility. Taking a deep breath, I spoke softly. "You will be okay. I will not disappear completely, but I cannot be your savior. You have to stand on your own for yourself and for your children." She nodded, tears rolling down her face, but this time there was a sense of resolve. These were tears not only of sorrow, but of determination. We stood in that quiet morning, two people forever changed by love, mistakes, and consequences, understanding that the road forward would be hard but also full of opportunity for growth. We parted that morning with a gentleness neither of us expected. There was no bitterness, no blame. She needed to walk her own path, and I needed to reclaim myself, to regain balance in my own life. We might never be together again, but the moment was transformative. I had learned, and I think she had too, that love is not always possession, not always attachment. True love is respect, empathy, and sometimes the courage to let go. In the weeks that followed, I watched her rise from the ashes of her old life. She faced her legal battles with her husband with strength I didn't know she had. She nurtured her children with a fierce, loving commitment. Slowly, steadily, she began to rebuild her life, piece by piece. And I realized something profound. Even when a relationship ends, it can leave behind lessons and growth that shape the people we become. Choices have consequences. Yes, but taking responsibility for those choices and learning from them is the truest form of maturity. The image that stays with me is her walking into the morning light, the children by her side, sunlight illuminating her face, showing determination, resilience, and a quiet grace. And I, standing silently behind, understood that life continues even without me by her side. We had both learned to stand tall in our own lives, to accept responsibility, and to embrace the painful yet beautiful journey of growth. The message of this story is clear. Love is not always about holding on. Sometimes the most profound expression of love is letting go, allowing the people you care about to find their own strength, to learn, to grow, and to live fully. Every choice has a cost, and facing those consequences with honesty and courage is what defines true maturity. And as the sun rose higher, casting its warm light across everything, I realized that even though we were no longer together, the experience had left us both stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Love, in its truest form, is not about possession, it is about growth, forgiveness, and the courage to face life as it comes.